It was dark in the streets, the lamps already on. I hadn't realized how late it was. It was cold, too, very cold for late April. The wedding was only a week away, and I was worrying about the weather as I hurried home. I can remember that clearly. I remember every detail about that night. I clung to it so hard in the beginning. I thought of nothing else, and so I remembered this, when so many pleasant memories had faded away completely. She sighed and began whispering again. Yes, I was worrying about the weather. I didn't want to have to move the wedding indoors. I was a few streets from my house when I heard them, a cluster of men under a broken street lamp laughing too loud, drunk. I wished I'd called my father to escort me home, but the way was so short it seemed silly. And then he called my name. Rose, he yelled, and the others laughed stupidly. I hadn't realized the drunks were so well dressed. It was Royce and some of his friends, sons of other rich men. Here's my Rose, Royce shouted, laughing with them, sounding just as stupid. You're late. We're cold you've kept us waiting so long. I'd never seen him drink before, a toast now and then at a party. He'd told me he didn't like champagne. I hadn't realized that he preferred something much stronger. He had a new friend, the friend of a friend, come up from Atlanta. What did I tell you, John? Royce crowed, grabbing my arm and pulling me closer. Isn't she lovelier than all your Georgia peaches? The man named John was dark-haired and suntanned. He looked me over like I was a horse he was buying. It's hard to tell, he drawled slowly. She's all covered up. They laughed, Royce like the rest. Suddenly, Royce ripped my jacket from my shoulders. It was a gift from him, popping the brass buttons off. They scattered all over the street. Show him what you look like, Rose. He laughed again and then tore my hat out of my hair. The pins wrenched my hair from the roots and I cried out in pain. They seemed to enjoy that, the sound of my pain. Rosalie looked at me suddenly as if she'd forgotten I was there. I was sure my face was as white as hers, unless it was green. I won't make you listen to the rest, she said quietly. They left me in the street, still laughing as they stumbled away. They thought I was dead. They were teasing Royce that he would have to find a new bride. He laughed and said he'd have to learn some patience first. I waited in the road to die. It was cold, though there was so much pain that I was surprised it bothered me. It started to snow and I wondered why I wasn't dying. I was impatient for death to come, to end the pain. It was taking so long. Carlyle found me then. He'd smelled the blood and come to investigate. I remember being vaguely irritated as he worked over me, trying to save my life. I'd never liked Dr. Cohen or his wife and her brother, as Edward pretended to be then. It had upset me that they were all more beautiful than I was, especially that the men were. But they didn't mingle in society, so I'd only seen them once or twice. I thought I died when he pulled me from the ground and ran with me. Because of the speed, it felt like I was flying. I remember being horrified that the pain didn't stop. Then I was in a bright room and it was warm. I was slipping away and I was grateful as the pain became dull. But suddenly something sharp was cutting me, my throat, my wrists, my ankles. I screamed in shock, thinking he'd brought me there to hurt me more. Then fire started burning through me and I didn't care about anything else. I begged him to kill me. When Esme and Edward returned home, I begged them to kill me too. Carlyle sat with me. He held my hand and said that he was so sorry, promising that it would end. He told me everything and sometimes I listened. He told me what he was, I was becoming. I didn't believe him. He apologized each time I screamed. Edward wasn't happy. I remember hearing them discuss me. I stopped screaming sometimes. It did no good to scream. What were you thinking, Carlyle? Edward said. Rosalie Hale? Rosalie imitated Edward's irritated tone to perfection. I didn't like the way he said my name, like there was something wrong with me. I couldn't just let her die, Carlyle said quietly. It was too much, too horrible, too much waste. I know, Edward said, and I thought he sounded dismissive. It angered me. I didn't know then that he really could see exactly what Carlyle had seen. It was too much waste. I couldn't leave her, Carlyle repeated in a whisper. Of course you couldn't, Esme agreed. People die all the time, Edward reminded him in a hard voice. Don't you think she's just a little recognizable, though? The Kings will have to put up a huge search. Not that anyone suspects the fiend, he growled. It pleased me that they seemed to know that Royce was guilty. I didn't realize that it was almost over, that I was getting stronger, and that was why I was able to concentrate on what they were saying. The pain was beginning to fade from my fingertips. What are we going to do with her? Edward asked disgustedly, or that's how it sounded to me at least. Carlyle sighed. That's up to her, of course. She may want to go her own way. I believed enough of what he told me that his words terrified me. I knew that my life was ended, and there was no going back. I couldn't stand the thought of being alone. The pain finally ended, and they explained to me again what I was. This time I believed. I felt the thirst, my hard skin. I saw my brilliant red eyes. Shallow as I was, I felt better when I saw my reflection in the mirror for the first time. Despite the eyes, I was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She laughed at herself for a moment. It took some time before I began to blame the beauty for what had happened to me, for me to see the curse of it, to wish that I had been, well, not ugly, but normal, like Vera, so I could have been allowed to marry someone who loved me and have pretty babies. That's what I'd wanted all along. It still doesn't seem like too much to have asked for. She was thoughtful for a moment, and I wondered if she'd forgotten my presence again, but then she smiled at me, her expression suddenly triumphant. You know, my record is almost as clean as Carlisle's, she told me. Better than Esme, 1,000 times better than Edward. I've never tasted human blood, she announced proudly. She understood my puzzled expression as I wondered why her record was only almost as clean. I did murder 5 humans, she told me in a complacent tone, if you can really call them human. But I was very careful not to spill their blood. I knew I wouldn't be able to resist that, and I didn't want any part of them in me, you see. I saved Royce for last. I hoped that he would hear of his friends' deaths and understand, know what was coming for him. I hoped the fear would make the end worse. I think it worked. He was hiding inside a windowless room behind a door as thick as the bank vaults, guarded outside by armed men when I caught up with him. Oops, 7 murders, she corrected herself. I forgot about his guards. They only took a second. I was overly theatrical. It was kind of childish, really. I wore a wedding dress I'd stolen for the occasion. He screamed when he saw me. He screamed a lot that night. Saving him for last was a good idea. It made it easier for me to control myself, to make it slower. She broke off suddenly and she glanced down at me. I'm sorry, she said in a chagrined voice. I'm frightening you, aren't I? I'm fine, I lied. I got carried away. Don't worry about it. I'm surprised Edward didn't tell you more about it, Rosalie said. He doesn't like to tell other people's stories. He feels like he's betraying confidences because he hears so much more than just the parts they mean for him to hear. She smiled and shook her head. I probably ought to give him more credit. He really is quite decent, isn't he?